Hello and welcome to the media. The Informal Justice and Home Affairs Council meeting and the Justice section of it have come to close. Today's discussions will serve as a good basis for further work on expert level. We know that very often experts need a clearer guidance on the road to follow ahead. I believe that today we managed to agree on how to give this guidance. And now some conclusions on the event. The tragic events of Paris introduced changes to the agenda initially foreseen for our meeting. We started the meeting with discussing the judicial aspects of fight against terrorism. The presidency severely condones terrorism, incitement to hatred and radicalization. We are ready to continue work to avert terrorism threats and fight against terrorism in all its forms. I am confident that legal aspects are of crucial importance in fight against terrorism, especially as regards the issue of foreign fighters. We see 5 main courses of action for further work. That is, first, modernization of legislation. Better use of Eurojust for operational work. Better understanding of prosecution and its legal aspects in case of foreign fighters. Use of rehabilitation programs in judicial aspects and strengthening cooperation between courts. The presidency plans to come up with a joint statement from the Justice and Home Affairs Ministers in further actions in fight against terrorism. Today, we will send the joint statement to the President of the EU Council, Donald Tusk. We believe it will serve as a good basis for future discussions also amongst the heads of state and government. Secondly, today we mentioned modernization in the context of data protection and also with regard to a new and wider use of new technologies and improving legislation regarding e-commerce. Data protection is crucial on the agenda of Europe. Given how the modern technologies and e-commerce are developing worldwide. The presidency intends to achieve progress regarding the data protection package. Our today's discussions will serve as a good basis to continue work on data protection matters. And as regards justice elements, we believe that developing them will help to Europe to become more competitive and grow. In the conclusion, I would like to inform you that the Latvian presidency has started a new tradition. We have introduced a new symbol in the work of the presidency. You can see it here in my hands. It is a gavel that will be passed on from one presidency to the next. Here you can see its base, where each presidency can engrave its logo. This tradition will be seen more in June, when the Latvian presidency will be symbolically passed on to Luxembourg with the help of banging this gavel, and will then pass on the presidency to Luxembourg. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for coming to this press conference and to giving your attention to the matters of justice and to everything we dealt with today. First, I'd like to speak about the main priority, which is combating terrorism. The recent terrorist attacks in Paris were an attack on our core values: respect for life, freedom and tolerance. We must stand up to protect these fundamental principles and values. EU Interior Ministers and my colleague Commissioner Avramopoulos had a discussion yesterday on terrorism and how Europe should respond to it. This morning, I discussed with the Justice Ministers the key role of justice policies in the future European agenda for security. I'd like to present to you now our 5 justice policy priorities to fight terrorism. First, we need to step up our action to prevent and combat anti-Semitic hatred as well as anti-Muslim sentiments. We need to fully enforce the existing EU legislation combating racism and xenophobia and make sure that it achieves results on the ground. Second, we need to make effective use of EU-level cooperation between all law enforcement actors. For example, the European arrest warrant and mutual legal assistance agreements are instruments that work well and that we must use to their full potential. Our agency Eurojust needs to work at its full potential and therefore be in a position to fully exchange information with Europol and be fully associated to Europol's local focal points dealing with terrorism. Third, we need to reinforce the prevention of radicalization, especially the radicalization in detention facilities. We need also to exchange experience and best practices. Fourth, through the Anti-Money Laundering Directive, we can address terrorist financing more effectively. I urge all Member States to implement the directive swiftly once it's adopted. We must be able to confiscate assets quickly and to draw the right conclusions from suspicious transfers. Fifth, we need to adapt our legislative framework. First and foremost, we need to accelerate the negotiations on the proposed Data Protection Police Directive for the personal data exchanges of law enforcement authorities across the EU. I want us to continue and to intensify our law enforcement cooperation. This directive can be a key component facilitating that cooperation. We might also look at aligning the framework decision on terrorism with United Nations resolution on foreign fighters. Today we also had a fruitful discussion about data protection, so I am very pleased that we had a first ministerial discussion today on this topic, especially on the Data Protection Directive for police and criminal justice authorities. Robust data protection rules will foster more effective cooperation based on mutual trust. To achieve this trust, we need to maintain a high level of data protection, both in the proposed regulation and the police directive. We agree that there needs to be clarity about when the General Data Protection Regulation applies and when the Police Directive applies, which takes account of the specific needs of law enforcement. The proposal on the table now for the Police Directive applies to the prevention, investigation, detention and prosecution of criminal offences or the execution of criminal penalties. This scope is sufficiently broad as it covers all work by authorities linked to the enforcement of criminal law. Other public authorities should be covered by the general data protection rules. We need to swiftly conclude the ongoing negotiations on this reform project in 2015, it means this year, and start implementing the new rules to keep our citizens safe in full respect of fundamental rights. Businesses and citizens are waiting for it. As for digital justice, another reason why we need the data protection reform is to kickstart the digital single market. In 2015, the Commission will propose new initiatives legislative and non-legislative, to bring the digital single market to the level of ambition needed to respond to the existing challenges. In this context, the Commission will simplify the rules for consumers making online and digital purchases and facilitate e-commerce. Today, we discussed obstacles faced by consumers and traders when buying on or selling online. There are clearly real problems that need concrete solutions. The key obstacle to the digital single market is the legal fragmentation of consumer and contract rules. As a result, only 15% of consumers bought online from other EU countries in 2014, while 44% did so domestically, and only 5% of businesses sell across border online. The complexity of the legal framework results in consumers losing trust in buying cross-border. EU consumers could save 11.7 billion each year if they could choose from a full range of EU goods and services when shopping online. And also for businesses, a key problem is the cost of this fragmentation. The fact that they need to comply with different contract law rules has a heavy price tag. Adding everything up, the total costs suffered by businesses when they sell to consumers in other EU countries is between 4 to 8 billion. These costs are, of course, the heaviest to bear for small and medium enterprises. And micro-enterprises represent up to 92% of all EU companies. It is clear that the potential of the digital single market is currently not exploited enough. We need to work together to offer both consumer and businesses the right rules to do away with legal fragmentation in the digital single market, to ensure that consumers are adequately protected and that business benefits from a level playing field. Finally, we discussed the further development of e-justice, which is one of my priorities. The digitalization of justice means easier access to justice for citizens, businesses, and legal professionals. Our goal should be seamless communication between citizens, practitioners, and courts everywhere in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll now take a few questions. Before asking your question, please state your name, the media you represent, and who you're asking the question to. Griselda, you were first, so there will be a microphone for you as well.
Merci beaucoup. C'est Griselda Pastor. Je travaille pour la radio española Cadena Ser.
I work for Cadena Ser, which is a Spanish radio station. Could I put a general question to you? Considering the legislative changes on the table for security needs, a lot of citizens are worried about their individual rights and they might be restricted. As somebody responsible for justice, what message would you send to people who fear that their rights might be restricted? And then, in the light of problems with Parliament, do you support or not those deputies who feel that a directive on data treatment is needed prior to the PNR?
Minister, maybe you would.
Yeah, paldies.
Yes. Thank you for your question. As regards data protection and security, the answer is very simple. On one hand, we need to take account of the security of the society and the interests of society, and on the other hand, we need to look at the individual rights and basic freedoms, and we need to act accordingly. We need to achieve balance between these two sides. We need to be able to avert terror attacks. At the same time, we need to be able to protect those people and their basic rights and freedoms whose data will be included in the databases. So we will have a higher responsibility to bear, a higher responsibility for data gatherers and those who process it. The data will only be processed in order to guarantee security of the society and to avert terror attacks and organized crime.
I would undersign what the Minister just said. We are not trying to solve a trivial problem, to find the right balance between the requirements on security on one side, which are so urgent, especially last several weeks after the Paris attacks. We keep talking about this. And on the other side, we need to be sure that the fundamental rights and the protection of privacy has its place. So this was very much discussed over the discussion about the Data Protection Regulation and the Police Directive, because we keep speaking about the scope of the Police Directive and about the scope the law enforcement authorities will have the right to deal with the private data. And this discussion will continue over the following months because we need to find the right balance. And I am very much in favor of the original proposal of the Commission, and I am convinced that the scope which has been proposed is right, but there were many concerns raised by the several member states today that they would like to strengthen the scope and widen the scope of the Police Directive. So the discussion has not been concluded yet, and we will continue. Anyway, this is the package, the Data Protection Regulation and the Police Directive. These things must go together, and I still believe that we will be able to achieve the solution by June. So during the Latvian presidency, this is one of our common priorities.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Minister would like to add something as well.
I just wanted to add that data protection regulation, in fact, will become a very good tool that will help every citizen to help protect his or her right to protect personal data. Because they will have the one-stop shop or one-stop agency principle, and everyone will be able to act in the cross-border context, and all the violations, if in case such occur, it will be possible to regulate the problem. It will be possible to apply to a certain agency in his or her own country, so it will be possible to turn to a certain agency in order to discuss, inform and avert the violation of rights if such has occurred. It will not be the case that a citizen of Latvia will have to report on violation that has happened in Ireland, for example, saying using Facebook or so. The protection of rights of every individual henceforth will be raised on a higher level compared to Directive 95, which is an old regulation and is no longer applicable.
Mike Collier, Agence France Presse. A question for Commissioner Jourova. You mentioned that you might look at aligning your new framework with UN resolutions on foreign fighters. I wondered if you could explain a little bit more what that might mean, and also why you're not a little bit more definite about it. Saying you might look at it is not like saying we are going to do it.
In the United Nations resolution, there is a definition of this new phenomenon, and we need to transfer this definition to the EU legislation, which is the framework decision, which will be probably soon submitted to the European Council for adoption, because we agreed with all the participating member states and the ministers today that we need clear definition, not only regarding foreign fighters, but also terrorism itself in terms of criminal offenses. We need to harmonize this criminal law aspect. So to have these definitions clear in the European Union framework decision will be very practical and will be then followed by the member states in, I hope, swift adoption and implementation into the national legislations.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Yeah.
Reuters news agency.
Mr. De Kerkhove mentioned earlier this morning that there are also problems regarding the how Europe would obtain evidence about these foreign fighters, because we're not on the ground in Syria or Iraq or any other of these countries. And did you discuss also this issue, and what do you see there as a potential solution from the judicial aspect? Thank you.
Yes, we discussed it, and also Madame Koning spoke about it, the president of Eurojust spoke about it, that in fact all the terrorists had criminal records. So they are recorded in ECRIS, which is the register of criminal records, which is used across the whole Europe. So we spoke about the possible enlarging of ECRIS to the third countries, and enlarging the attention of Eurojust also abroad, not only on the European Union. So it would also cover the attention paid to the people who are abroad. This needs also external actions to facilitate the internal security in Europe. This is a very wide and complex phenomenon, and to face all the challenges and threats, it will require very close cooperation of all the actors. It means of the European agencies like Eurojust and Europol. Closer cooperation is very much needed, and both agencies confirm they are ready to have such closer cooperation, but also with the member states. In December already we had a very good discussion with the member states on the phenomenon of foreign fighters, and those countries which have deeper and longer experience with terrorism and with the phenomenon of foreign fighters itself, they offered their help to other countries where this problem can be spread. So here is the offer also of those advanced countries in advice and best practices. And I think we are facing the threats which will need a consolidated, common approach and steps to be made.
Yeah. Next question. The microphone went just around the booth. Oh, there it is.
Thank you, Ryan Sabit-Parry for the Associated Press. This is a question for Ms. Jourova as well. Giles de Kerkhove also talked about terrorist rehabilitation programs this morning as well. Was that also discussed today in today's meeting? And if so, what's the solution there? What would a terrorist rehabilitation program look like exactly?
I cannot now explain to you how he meant it. It's more, it's one thing which we share, and I share with Mr. Avramopoulos, because this is the security agenda. Anyway, as for the terrorist rehabilitation, we spoke about the penalties and about the detention conditions, because we are convinced that we should not allow the spread of radicalization in the prisons. So we are talking about some measures which would prevent us from this threat. But I think it was more on the agenda of yesterday's meeting of the Ministers of Interior.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm being told we have to end unless there's something very, very urgent. I guess not. Thank you for coming. We'll see you all next time, either in Brussels or again here. Thank you.